when a group of fake HOA cops showed up at my door, claiming I was violating community rules. I knew something was off. With their fake badges and a whole lot of arrogance, they tried to arrest me in my own backyard. The problem? I'm the real town marshal, and now these idiots are about to find out the hard way that they messed with the wrong person. I'd always known the HOA in my neighborhood was a bunch of lunatics with too much free time and not enough useful things to do. A group of sheriff-like residents who think they're the judge, jury, and executioner of anyone who doesn't follow the absurd rules they invent. They'd picked on me before about the size of my fence, the color of my door, and even the way I parked my car, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that morning. I was having my coffee, quite calmly, when I noticed a group of people standing outside in the reflection of the window. There were four figures on my sidewalk, all wearing matching polo shirts, sunglasses, and an air of authority that looked like it had been bought at a cheap sale. One of them was holding a notebook. Another had a toy radio strapped around her waist. In the icing on the cake was the woman in the middle with short, dyed hair. Her arms were crossed, and she had an expression like she'd just sniffed a liter of vinegar. Karen, she stood out as the leader of the group, as if she were the general of an army of idiots. I took a deep breath, finished the last sip of my coffee, and went to answer the door. Before I had fully opened it, she started talking as if she were giving a press conference. "You are in serious violation of HOA rules, and we are here to take action," she declared. I stared at the woman, half expecting a hidden camera. Was this a prank? What did she want now? Before I could say anything, she pulled out a piece of plastic and shoved it in my face. "You are under investigation for numerous infractions," she began, "including the unauthorized painting of your garage, the presence of an unregistered vehicle on your property." And then she paused dramatically as if about to accuse me of murder, and inappropriate behavior toward members of the community. I had to hold back a laugh. The garage had been the exact same color since I moved in. The unregistered vehicle was my perfectly legal truck parked on my own lot, and inappropriate behavior? In other words, I simply refused to attend their boring, pointless HOA meetings. That's where the unbelievable part came in. "Because you refused to heed previous warnings," she continued, "the HOA is exercising its right to civil custody, and we're here to take you into custody until the matter's resolved." Detention? I blinked a few times, trying to absorb what she was saying. "You want to arrest me?" I asked. Karen puffed out her chest as if she were about to receive a medal for bravery. "The HOA has full authority over this neighborhood," she said. The other three idiots nodded in sync, like a choir of well-trained parrots. That's when I realized the level of insanity. They really thought they had the power to arrest someone. Little did they know I'm the town marshal, not a mall security guard, not a neighborhood volunteer, but a real deputy with a badge, a gun, and a good dose of patience for this kind of nonsense. I kept my cool and decided to play along for a moment. "Interesting," I said, feigning consideration. "And how exactly do you intend to arrest me?" Karen pointed to one of her thugs, a man with a beer belly and a t-shirt 2 sizes too small. He pulled a pair of plastic handcuffs from his pocket. Plastic. "We have our methods," he said, trying to sound tough. It was official. The circus had set up camp on my doorstep. I took a deep breath, stepped back, and in one swift movement, pulled my wallet from my pocket, opening it to reveal my shiny badge. Karen's smile disappeared faster than a Black Friday discount. "Good to know you think you can make arrests," I said in the most serious voice I could manage. "Because right now you're committing a series of crimes, including impersonation of a law enforcement officer and attempted kidnapping." The silence was instantaneous. Karen's eyes widened, her henchmen exchanged glances, and for the first time, they realized they'd been messing with the wrong person. What are you implying?" the woman stammered, her confidence crumbling like a house of cards in a gale. I crossed my arms. "I'm implying that unless you disappear from my property in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to arrest you for real." Silence. Sweat started running down one of the guys' foreheads. Karen's hand trembled slightly as she still clutched her laminated paper. Then, like a bunch of rats fleeing a sinking ship, they began stepping backward, mumbling lame excuses. "It's not over yet," Karen shouted before spinning on her heels and disappearing with her pathetic companions. I watched them walk away, feeling a mix of amusement and disbelief. What the hell had just happened? But deep down, I knew this story was far from over. If I thought that ridiculous arrest scene was the end of the joke, I was very much mistaken. I've known stubborn people, but Karen and her henchmen took it to an almost artistic level. Normal people would accept defeat and move on with their lives, but not this woman. Not only did she not give up, she decided to double down. The first retaliation came the next day. When I went out to take out the garbage, I realized my cans were gone. They had simply disappeared, no sign of them on the sidewalk or the side of the house. I looked around, and of course, I saw Karen across the street, standing with her arms crossed, looking like she thought she was the queen of the neighborhood. When our eyes met, she made sure to flash a satisfied little smile before heading inside. I took a deep breath and tried to ignore it. But when I got to my mailbox, I found an envelope with the HOA stamp on it. I opened it, knowing it was going to be nonsense, and I wasn't disappointed. A list of penalties because, according to them, I was in non-compliance with community standards. Among the highlights, I was forbidden to use waste disposal services, could no longer park my car in the garage, and had to attend a mandatory meeting to discuss my inappropriate behavior. I took the paper and tore it in half right there, letting the pieces fall to the ground. If Karen wanted to annoy me, she'd have to try harder. But of course, she had more tricks up her sleeve. That afternoon, I went out to run errands, and when I came back, I found an orange cone in the middle of my driveway. Next to it was a plastic notice stuck to a piece of wood, as if it were an official notification. It said my garage was closed by order of the HOA. It was the most absurd thing I'd ever seen. How could someone have the nerve to ban someone else's garage? I walked over, tore off the paper, and unceremoniously tossed the cone onto the sidewalk. Across the street, I saw two of Karen's cronies watching. One of them was holding a notebook, scribbling who knows what, maybe owner, removing cone improperly, as if they were serious investigators and not two idiots playing inspectors. It wasn't even 2 minutes before Karen appeared. "You can't remove that," she barked. I looked at her, unimpressed. Holding the cone as if it were a murder weapon, she glared at me. "Oh, can't I? In my own house?" She pointed at the laminated paper, her face already turning red with anger. "This is an HOA sanction. You can't just ignore community rules." I took a deep breath to keep from laughing in her face. "Karen," I said, "you don't have the authority to ban my garage. In fact, you have no authority to do anything but annoy me." Her eyes widened in indignation, but before she could reply, I walked into the house and slammed the door. The story, however, wasn't over yet. The next day, while I was at the police station, I got a call from one of the few neighbors who wasn't part of this crazy HOA cult. He sounded nervous. "Dude, the police are in front of your house," he said. I stopped what I was doing, twice actually, because the news hit me hard. 2 cars. They said they'd received a tip-off about a man with a gun on your property. That's when it clicked. Karen had escalated. She'd called the police and fabricated a story to get me in trouble. I grabbed my keys, jumped in my car, and sped home. When I arrived, I saw 2 policemen talking to Karen, who was playing the perfect victim. Her attitude was that of someone deeply concerned for the community's safety. If I didn't know she was a snake, I might have bought it. I stepped out of the car, and the officers recognized me instantly. I knew them both. Honest, good guys. And I could tell by the looks on their faces they knew this was a waste of time. "Oops, boss," one of them said a little awkwardly. "We received a report of suspicious activity involving a man with a gun at this residence." I looked straight at Karen. "I bet the report came from this lady here, huh?" She tried to play it off, placing a hand on her chest. "I only reported what I heard. Some people saw suspicious movement and got worried." The policemen exchanged glances, already fed up. One sighed and turned to me. "Well, since there's no real threat, we'll register it as a prank. But Miss Karen, just for the record, making false reports can get you into a lot of trouble." Her face turned red. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. She opened her mouth to protest but gave up, crossing her arms in fury. The policeman left and I stood there, staring at Karen. She stared back, silent. For once, I felt she understood she was playing with fire. But I knew she hadn't given up yet. She'd try something worse. and I couldn't wait to see how far this woman would go before she completely destroyed herself. I already knew Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, but after the police prank fiasco, anyone with a shred of shame would have buried their head in a hole and stayed quiet. Not this woman. For her, losing wasn't an option. If the attempt to arrest me with plastic handcuffs and the false complaint didn't work, it was obvious she had a plan C. That plan revealed itself the very next morning. I was woken by the sound of a heavy truck pulling up right in front of my house. Still groggy, I stumbled to the window and saw a team of uniformed workers unloading from the vehicle, equipped with excavators, shovels, and a bunch of orange cones. They looked ready to start major construction work. My first thought was that they had the wrong address, but then I spotted Karen across the street, arms crossed, wearing a satisfied little smile, like she'd just pulled a loose thread and was about to watch my world unravel. I went downstairs, still in my pajamas, opened the door, and approached the workers. One, who seemed like the team leader, turned to me with a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, sir," he said. "We're here to start repairs on the underground pipes." I stared, confused. "What repairs?" He replied, "We received a request from the Residents Association informing us there's a water leak on this property." I glanced at Karen, who was pretending to admire a tree. "Let me guess," I said. "The work order was signed by a certain Karen?" The man flipped through his papers and nodded. "Yes, the order came from Karen Thompson, president of the HOA. That bastard had arranged to have my entire yard dug up for a leak that didn't exist." I took a deep breath to keep from telling everyone to get lost. "Look, buddy," I said, "there's no leak here. Neither you nor the HOA are authorized to touch anything, so you can pack up your tools and turn around." The guy hesitated, glancing at his colleagues as if waiting for confirmation. "Well, sir, the thing is, we're already here." "And now you're leaving," I cut in. He opened his mouth to protest, but then I showed him my badge. The effect was immediate. His eyes widened, he swallowed hard, and he turned to his crew. "Right, guys, let's call it a day." The workers started gathering their tools, and Karen came marching toward me like a runaway train. "You can't do this," she barked. I raised an eyebrow. "Do what? Stop them from destroying my yard for no reason? The HOA has authority over the neighborhood's infrastructure," she snapped. "And I have the authority to arrest you for trespassing and fraud," I shot back. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish out of water. For the first time, she seemed genuinely speechless. "But don't worry." This woman recovered quickly. "You're disrespecting the community," she said. "That's not how a good neighbor behaves." I took a step forward, lowering my voice just to watch the color drain from her face. "And you're meddling where you shouldn't, Karen." She didn't reply. She threw her hands up, huffed, and stormed back to her house, stomping like a child throwing a tantrum. But of course, she wasn't going to stop there. The expulsion attempt came the following week. I received a letter from the HOA stating that my house was under disciplinary review and that my behavior was harming the community's well-being. It was their fancy way of saying they were trying to evict me. That's right. This crazy woman wanted me out of my own home. According to the letter, I'd accumulated several serious infractions and was openly defying the HOA's authority. Therefore, my presence was no longer desired, and they were taking steps to revoke my residency in the neighborhood. I had to laugh out loud. The HOA didn't have the slightest power to do that. They didn't own my house, had no control over my mortgage, and couldn't just decide I couldn't live there. But it seemed Karen thought they could. To make matters worse, some neighbors started giving me dirty looks, clearly influenced by the smear campaign she'd launched. Overnight, I'd become the neighborhood's public enemy number one, the problematic guy, the rebel defying the sacred order of the HOA. It got so ridiculous that one day while I was at the supermarket, a neighbor who barely spoke to me approached with the tone of someone sharing hot gossip. "You know," she said, "some people think you don't fit in here very well. Maybe you should consider moving." I gave her a fake smile. "Some people should worry more about their own lives." She blushed and slinked away, caught in her moment of shame. The disciplinary meeting was scheduled for a Friday evening. I attended just for the pleasure of watching Karen fail in person. The community room was packed, with neighbors seated in chairs lined up like a courtroom. Karen stood at the front, a pile of papers on the table, clearly ready to publicly execute me. She sniffed and began speaking in the tone of a kindergarten teacher explaining rules to children. We're here to discuss the highly problematic behavior of the gentleman who refuses to cooperate with the community, she said. I rolled my eyes. Cut it, Karen. Do you want to kick me out of the neighborhood? She tried to hide it, but the truth was obvious. Well, considering the number of offenses you've accumulated, she started. I leaned forward. What offenses exactly? Forged kidnapping? Trolling the police? Illegal construction in my yard? Her face turned red, but she pressed on. The point is, I raised my hand interrupting her. The point is, the HOA has no power to remove anyone from here. This isn't a gated community, Karen. You're not the sheriff, and this meeting means absolutely nothing. The silence was deafening. Some neighbors glanced at each other, as if realizing this for the first time. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to laugh it off. This is absurd. You simply don't fit into our community, she said. I crossed my arms. Yeah, I think I'll keep not fitting in, because I'm not going anywhere. She stared at me, her face burning with anger, but she knew she'd lost. Except Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat, and I knew she had one last dirty trick up her sleeve. I'd seen Karen try to arrest me, dig up my yard, accuse me of fake crimes, and even attempt to kick me out of the neighborhood. Every time I thought she'd reached the peak of madness, she found a way to outdo herself. After the public humiliation at the HOA meeting, I knew she'd come back with everything she had, and she did. This time, it wasn't a ridiculous letter, a cone in my driveway, or a false police report. This time, Karen decided to play dirty for real. The week after the meeting, I woke up to the unpleasant sound of sirens outside my house. I looked out the window and to my surprise saw 2 county enforcement cars parked in front. And of course, there she was across the street, pretending to just observe the scene, but with that same satisfied look as always. Karen had called the authorities on me again. I went downstairs and opened the door before the inspectors could knock. One of them, a middle-aged man with a notebook, looked at me with forced professionalism and got straight to the point. Sir, we've received a complaint about multiple structural irregularities in this property. We're going to need to conduct a full inspection. I frowned. Irregularities? Yes, he said. According to the report, this residence has unauthorized construction, irregular plumbing, and a possible pest infestation. I almost laughed. Karen wasn't just playing games to annoy me anymore. She was trying to get the authorities to condemn my house. I leaned against the doorframe, eyeing the inspector. And who made this complaint? He hesitated before answering. Well, the HOA officially filed it. Of course it was the HOA, and of course Karen was behind it. Okay, let's go, I said, opening the door wider and gesturing for them to come in. Do the inspection. The inspector looked surprised. He probably expected me to argue, but I stayed calm because, unlike Karen, I wasn't doing anything illegal. My house was fully up to code. They spent nearly 2 hours inspecting everything, measuring walls, checking pipes, looking in cupboards, taking photos. Meanwhile, Karen and some of her lackeys stood outside, waiting for confirmation that I was in trouble. When the inspectors finished, a younger one approached me. So, sir, he said, we did the full check and found none of the irregularities mentioned in the complaint. Your property complies with all county regulations. I tried to hold back my laughter, but it slipped out. So you mean the complaint was completely false? The inspector scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable. Well, technically, yes. I smiled and crossed my arms. Good, because I'm going to file a formal complaint against the HOA for harassment and misuse of public resources. Now Karen got nervous. She marched toward me before the inspectors could even leave. You're overreacting. It was just a safety protocol, she exclaimed. I rolled my eyes. A safety protocol, huh? Strange, because the inspectors said my house is perfect. So either you lied or you're terrible at inspecting anything. She gritted her teeth and looked at the inspectors, as if expecting them to defend her, but they just shrugged, clearly done with her nonsense. She tried to argue more, but I was already on the phone with the inspection department, formalizing my complaint against her. When she realized this could become a real problem, Karen finally backed off. This isn't over yet, she grumbled before stomping away. But lucky for her, it was over. Over the next few days, Karen's situation only worsened. The complaint I'd filed against the HOA was taken seriously, especially since it wasn't the first time they'd received reports about their bullying tactics. An investigation began, and other stories surfaced. They discovered Karen was finding residents without justification, just to raise money for the association's important events, which were basically parties for her and her friends. She'd also hired shady contractors for maintenance in common areas and pocketed some of the cash. The icing on the cake? She wasn't even supposed to be HOA president. The rules required annual re-elections, but she'd never held one. She stayed in power because no one had the energy to challenge her. Until now. A special meeting was called to decide the HOA's future. Karen was there, trying to defend herself, but the situation had spiraled out of control. Most residents were furious at being deceived. The people who once followed her were now backing away, realizing they'd been used. The final blow came when a county auditor reviewed the HOA's finances and revealed over $30,000 was missing. That was enough to bring Karen down for good. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her from office immediately. She still tried to argue, threatened to sue everyone, but no one listened. Then the police were called. She tried to slip out, but two officers stopped her at the door. As real handcuffs clicked onto her wrists, I heard a resident shout, "Well done, Karen!" The self-proclaimed dictator of the neighborhood was escorted away like a criminal. After Karen vanished, the HOA underwent a major overhaul. Rules were relaxed, unfair fines were canceled, and the new board ensured no one would ever have absolute power over the residents again. The funniest part? A few weeks later, I learned Karen had tried to appeal in court, but it went nowhere. She had to sell her house and move out of town. They say she went somewhere where nobody knows her, probably plotting to restart her little empire of control in another neighborhood. But here, peace has finally returned. Honestly, it's never felt so good to see a for sale sign on that street. Did you like this story? Then don't forget to subscribe to the channel